Большое спасибо. Thank you for inviting me. I would like to thank the previous speaker for mentioning the Nuremberg Tribunal, the main decision from which was the definition of a war of aggression. To launch a war of aggression is a supreme international crime, differing from other war crimes only insofar as it contains the accumulated evil of the whole. It wasn't 70 years ago. It wasn't 70 years that this has been observed. It was only 65. When the United States and Great Britain attacked Iraq, that was a war of aggression, pure and simple, under the definition given by Nuremberg. This is important to remember if we are to adhere to the rule of law internationally. I would like to dedicate my speech to the title, Stay Human. I found yesterday fascinating, very interesting. My only comment is that we were in our heads, and we're still in our heads. That's not even half of us. We need to be in our hearts as well, and I hope I'll have time to explain what I mean. Stay Human was the name of a book written by Vittorio Arconi right before we sailed on the Stay Human boat, the U.S. boat to Gaza in 2011. He died just 2 months before we left Athens. Now, I would say that there are lots of implications to that, but what needs to be stated right off the bat in Staying Human is what was said at the very beginning of our session today about not thinking that one is higher than others, not thinking that one is not subject to the equality with which we are all born. And so when our president and others say that we are the sole indispensable country of the world, that's not staying human. What does that mean? Well, when I speak at universities, I often ask, if you know figures of speech, synonyms, and how about antonyms? What's the antonym? What is the opposite of indispensable nation? And the students usually scratch their heads and they say, well, dispensable? And I said, that's right, dispensable. So when we say we are the only indispensable country in the world, all other countries are by definition dispensable. That's not the way it's supposed to work, and that's not the way it's going to work. Now, President Putin made a point after he rescued President Obama from the first mess on Syria in the late summer of 2013, as we say in America, when he pulled Obama's chestnuts out of the fire and prevented a major war with Syria, he wrote an op-ed for the New York Times. It appeared on September 11, 2013. And it was a very interesting article, but it finished up with a paragraph that didn't seem to belong. What the paragraph said was, and I personally feel that it's a great mistake for anyone to set themselves up as indispensable. That's not the way the world works. To give a nation the idea that they are superior, extraordinary, indispensable, is a very, very risky notion, and so I disagree with President Obama on that. I think God created us all equal. Now, I just learned yesterday from someone who was in Valdai 2 years ago that Mr. Putin acknowledged that he inserted that last paragraph himself at the very end before it appeared in the New York Times. What am I saying here? I'm saying that when a country acts the way the United States did, first by invading Iraq, the accumulated evil of the whole, well, think torture. Think black prisons, in which, to my great regret, many of our countries contributed. Think about kidnapping off the streets of Milano. Those are the accumulated evils of a war of aggression. What I'd like to do is move quickly well, let's just mention the headlines in the United States papers. The New York Times and the Washington Post are rooting for another war. It's very much like 2002, 2003. We have to put boots on the ground. We have to do something to stop aggression or to stop terrorists. Well, one of the headlines in March said, Putin planned takeover Crimea very early on. First sentence. Putin now admits that on the 23rd of February, 2014, he got together with his security officials and planned what they were going to do about Crimea. See, that was a month before they took over Crimea. Now, I ask my colleagues when I give these speeches, I say, well, what's wrong with that? Everybody kind of looks at me with a blank stare. And finally, I have to say, doesn't anyone know what happened on the 22nd of February, 2014? In other words, the day before? I said, oh, well, what happened? Well, there was a coup. George Friedman called it, the most blatant coup in the history of mankind. Now, people say revolution will not be televised, right? Well, this coup was YouTubeized. You all know, probably, that Victoria Nuland, the Assistant Secretary of State, she had an intercepted conversation with the ambassador there. So Yats is our guy. Yats is the guy. This is what we're going to do. 2.5 weeks before the coup. So these kinds of things are important to mention because American readers of the New York Times and the Washington Post who style themselves as sophisticates don't really know what's going on, and that is very dangerous. I was the chief of the Soviet Foreign Policy Branch in 1972. I was in Moscow in May for the signing of the ABM Treaty and the interim agreement on offensive weapons. So to watch that frittered away, as George Bush did when he came into office, was very painful. I had 3 people working on the issue. One with the delegation, we called it the SALT delegation, one supporting the military side of things, and one writing up the results of the effort. So when this was reversed, I asked myself, well, what's really going on here? And what I noticed is that the ABM treaty was not something that was simply tossed away blithely by people like President Putin. What most people have ignored is the fact that in one of his marathon press interviews, he took advantage of the opportunity on the 17th of April last year to say this. I'll say a few words about our talks on missile defense. This issue is no less and probably even more important than NATO's eastward expansion. Whoa. Incidentally, our decision on Crimea was partially prompted by this. What does he mean by this? He means the anti-ballistic system. The anti-ballistic missile system, which we jocularly call in the United States the largest, the most lucrative corporate welfare program that has ever been devised by mankind. Now, just this last year, actually it was last month, in Valdai, the question came up again. What Mr. Putin did was say to our ambassador, the last ambassador to the Soviet Union and the first to Russia, he said, well, Mr. Ambassador, this is supposed to be a discussion group. What do you think of the ABM treaty being voided by the Bush administration? But this is what he said. He said, I was opposed to that, but please, the Russians have nothing to fear from that. It's mostly to secure employment in the United States. Secure employment. Well, you secure less people in the arms industry than you do in other industries. People know that. But more important, it's not for the workers. Who is it that's profiting from all this stuff that really won't work? Well, it's what Pope Francis called the blood-stained arms trade, okay, or the blood-stained arms manufacturers. Now, I only have a few more minutes left, and I'd like to turn to the human aspect of this. Could we have the first slide first? You all have seen this photo, but I'd ask you just to kind of be quiet within yourself while I recite a Russian poem that has always been deep in my heart because it says something very, very true. It's by Nekrasov, поэт русской скорби. Внимая ужасом войны, при каждой новой жертве боя, мне жаль не друга, не жены, мне жаль не самого героя. Увы, утешится жена, и друга лучший друг забудет, а где-то есть душа одна, она до гроба помнить будет. При лицемерных наших тел и всякой пошлости и прозы одни я в мире подсмотрел святые, искренние слезы, то слезы бедных матерей. Им не забыть своих детей, погибших в кровавой гневе, как не понять плохушие своих поникнувших ветвей. What about Alan Kurdi's mat, his mother? Well, you can be very indispensable and above it all and say, well, she's lucky. She drowned too. Next slide, please. All right. Now, this happened in 2005, so this is 10 years ago. That blood-spattered 5-year-old girl was the only one of her family of 6 that survived when her father, driving the car and in the front seat, her mother, didn't hear the U.S. sentry say, stop. They riddled the car with bullets, killed all her brothers and sisters, and her mother and father, and the blood you see is the blood from her mother and father splattered from the front seat. What about her mother? Well, again, you could say, well, her mother, she died too. Well, are we so heartless? Are we so heartless? How can we pay the Turks $3 billion just so they don't let any more people like this come into our countries? $3 billion. Cheap. Now, I must say that Germany, for example, has already this year accepted 950,000 refugees, mostly from Syria. But where are the hearts of the rest of us? And where are the hearts of Germany now as they come up with $3 billion rather than addressing the causes? A friend of mine and I spoke in Germany in September, and the title of our speeches mostly was, Wie werden heute Kriege gemacht? And while we were there, the refugees started coming, and we changed the title to, Wie werden heute Flüchtlinge gemacht? We were in Rostock, in northern Germany, at the Bahnhof, and there were hundreds of Syrian refugees already there. And the Germans had a sign up behind it that said, Alle haben die gleichen Rechte. Okay? That was good. But how can we translate that to what's going on now? With even the Germans saying, well, maybe we'll spend 1,700 more troops into the fray in Syria. Well, you're getting my point. If we don't get people touched by innocent suffering, it is innocent suffering, personal experience of that moves the heart and is a catalyst for action. And I'd close simply by quoting Tolstoy, who told us that it's okay to be nonviolent, but it has to be an active nonviolence, It has to be a civil disobedience nonviolence. And I know that most of us are not into that. I don't know how I got into it, but I've spent some time in jail too. And I'll tell you this, I see a lot of gray, a lot of hair about the same color of mine here. I'll just tell you this, that when I got beat up, arrested, and put in jail simply for standing up quietly when Hillary Clinton was speaking 5 years ago at George Washington University in Washington, the friends of mine from Veterans for Peace showed my picture and showed what happened. And Hillary Clinton received hundreds of thousands of phone calls and also emails. Why do I mention that? I mention it because a lot of Americans were very upset. Why? Because they don't like old people getting beat up, right? Here was the headline, 71-year-old McGovern, former CIA analyst, beat up, and they showed the picture. So what am I saying here to you? You have an advantage, you who are almost as old as I. Put your body into it. It's that late. Martin Luther King, our prophet, used to say, there is such a thing as too late. We are getting to that point now. Write your articles, give your speeches, but also consider putting your body into it, because young people need a good example, and most people don't like old folks like me getting beat up. I'll finish on that note. Thank you very much.